Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, whatever time you happen to be watching this in the future. It's a great day to be optimistic. I'm Patrick. I'm here with Trace and Anarcho-Contrarian. For those of you who don't know, I'm the other half of the Rizoma Field School. Ashley, that's my wife. So today we have Anarcho-Contrarian joining us from the United States of America, from deep cover underneath a very warm beard that's going to keep him toasty and warm on the hot seat today. Absolutely. As he gets grilled with just friendly conversation about whatever happens to come up. So Anarcho-Contrarian, welcome. Trace, thanks for being here again.
Yeah,
and having
no
me. You're the brains behind the operation. You're the hair behind the operation.
Yeah, the hair behind it. Although not anymore. Now AC.
Try to give him a run for his money.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. So anyway, it's fitting also leading up to Halloween that you're in a nice costume. Let's go ahead and get started. And I just want to say once again, thanks for being here. Anarcho-Contrarian, a big heavy hitter in the Twitter corner, whatever, various corners of the, I don't know how many 59-sided polygon of the corners of Twitter that people who I associate with frequent. But I'll tell you a little thing before we get going, just to butter you up, which is Ashley was trying to get me to use Twitter. Like, I don't know, this was 9 months ago or whatever. I said, I don't want to go on Twitter and waste my time all day, every day. This is stupid. And I was reading Anarcho-Contrarian tweets via Ashley. And I was like, all right, this is not that uncool. And then Anarcho-Contrarian, among other people, got me to keep reading, keep engaging, and have more fun. And I think, I don't know, maybe as all of us are vulnerable to do, is maybe I got overly into certain things of it and got to kind of temper it. But I'm glad I came and joined the fray because I get to meet people like this, Anarcho-Contrarian, who I do know, and I got to meet in real life. Sure. And it's just going to be a whole challenge of me the whole time to not say your real name, but it will be easier with the beard, I think. So thanks for letting me get into Twitter and have fun and meet people who are worthwhile and worth meeting. And welcome again. Cool. So I just wanted you to tell people, because we see your Twitter. I don't even know what the things are called. The picture, and then it says your name. What are they called? Banner.
Banner.
There you go. So we see your Twitter banner over there. But just tell us a little bit about you and both your personal and maybe professional background.
Sure.
Who are you? Where are you from? What's your deal? And then maybe explain Anarcho-Contrarian as a Twitter handle.
Sure. Yeah. So welcome. Appreciate you having me. So greetings from New England, where we're having a northeaster right now. So hopefully my house doesn't blow down. It's been quite windy. So yeah, Anarcho-Contrarian. So a Twitter anon, right? But I'm a real life person, obviously, relatively normal dude. Father, husband, New Englander, son of the live free or die state, if you will. Twitter really is my online outlet to connect with people who I've share the same values with, which I don't really get the opportunity in real life. And it's a place for me to storytell first and foremost. Like, that's what I enjoy the most. Share some pictures from how I grew up and some of my family back in the day, and try to connect with my past and connect other people with my past, and like just a different way of living, which is distant for most of society, but is close to me. Like it happened in my lifetime. And we'll maybe get into that a little bit, but and really it's a place for me to think out loud, like think about how might we change our society. And really, frankly, for me, it's like a nostalgia project. Like, how might I return home? And we'll get back into that maybe a little bit later. But that, that's me and who I am, I guess. I try to keep it relatively anonymous. Although if you really wanted to put in some sleuthing, like, I'm sure you could figure out who I am. But not that I say anything controversial, but it's just a little bit against the grain of what I do in real life. I work a fairly corporate job to pay the bills and support the family, and really put away and provide for some of the goals that I talk about on Twitter, what a future might look like for me and my family. So that's kind of like me, a peek behind the curtain, I guess. In terms of like Anarcho-Contrarian, like, where did that come from? I guess it's sort of equal parts sincere and like a play on the term, anarcho-capitalist, anarcho-syndicalist. So maybe we'll touch on like the contrarian side first, right? So, it's really, I think, a nod to Wendell Berry. So I admitted a couple tweets ago, like, this is a Wendell Berry Stan account, like I will make no apologies. But he has this fantastic poem that's, The Contrariness of the Mad Farmer. And when I read it, like, it was just a point in my life where like, it totally rang true. And, it speaks to my nature and sort of my line of thinking. Like I've always been like a, yeah, but type of person, and I like to take sort of an oppositional stance sometimes, and sometimes even most of the times even oppositional to myself. I like to play devil's advocate. I like critical thinking, but when I read The Contrariness of the Mad Farmer, everybody should read it. It's a fantastic poem. But just to give you like a taste, one of my favorite lines goes something like, when they said, "I know my Redeemer liveth," I told them he's dead. And when they told me God is dead, I answered, he goes fishing in the Kentucky River every day. I see him often. So, that's contrarianism to me, right? Nobody's going to tell me what to do, sometimes including myself, and I'll be contrary to myself quite often. So that's the contrarian piece, and the anarcho piece. I'm sure we're going to unpack this a little bit. It's a little tongue in cheek, speaking to my politics. Certainly not, an anarchist in sort of like the modern mimetic sense, throwing Molotov cocktails. Like, I don't want to tear anything down, so to speak. I think for me, it's sort of like a distribution of power and decision making, and that's where one of my favorite, at least recent authors come into play, Murray Bookchin, and like the remaking of society and ecology of freedom and such. Like, he talks about having to build alternative institutions, right? Like trying to tear down the major institutions is not going to work, right? There's too many forces at play preserving those institutions, and so let's abandon them and not necessarily try to abolish them, right? Let's create our own institutions, and that that goes from a government standpoint, that goes from a corporate institution standpoint. That's sort of how I feel from an anarchism standpoint. Like a little bit of a tell. My first book that I ever read for fun, and was Edward Abbey's The Monkey Wrench Gang, which everybody should totally read. I've read that almost a dozen times right now. But Edward Abbey, was sort of an eco-anarchist. And one of my favorite quotes is like, "Anarchism, you bet your sweet Betsy, the only cure for the ills of democracy is more democracy and a lot more of it." And so I just think that, I think that fundamentally we have the ability to make our own decisions, to provide, first things for ourselves. Michael Sharon of Thomas talks a little bit about first things, right? Like the things that we need to survive: our food, our sustenance, our shelter, our protection. We have the capacity to do these things for ourselves. So we should tend towards doing that, right? And I think, coming along with that, is sort of that's where distributism comes into play. Widely distributed and ownership and use of productive property, right? Like, which inherently means that is a localized system, and multi-generational system. Those are the types of things that I believe in. So that's a toe dip in the water. I don't want to ramble too much more, but
no, this is really good because you make it so that we don't have to really do much, and everything is really this is better. I'll tell you my opinion. I've said this to other people offline several times. A lot of times when people do podcasts, they're just kind of talking through the outline that they would have written for a blog post. And that's not the right way to use like a spoken medium, but you're really good at talking. So this doesn't sound like the outline of a blog post. It sounds like something you obviously own this knowledge and really feel let's put it this way. You're not regurgitating anything. You live this knowledge, you live this point of view, and it shows. So that's why I didn't want to interrupt you. But what I was gonna say once it was my turn to talk was, it sounds like what you're describing is anarchy as a human being doesn't need the state to live. The human being doesn't need a giant overarching superstructure, whatever you want to call it, to guide on an individual, family level, community level, the course of what that's going to be. And the more that that's happened throughout history, it seems like the more ways there are to feel trapped, to feel helpless, hopeless, and lash out in really negative ways. So that's what I'm hearing, even though it's not exactly what you said, but I think there's something there in common. And what when you were talking about institutions, I think we've seen in the last, let's just go back to the last 15 years in the United States, for example, we've seen so many institutional failures, and those include government institution failures, social institution failures, religious institutional failures, just whole sectors of the economy failing. And I can get into the specifics, but I think most people listening will know what I'm kind of talking about. So if those things, those entities have kind of shown themselves for being not totally failures, but in very important and big ways, coming short of what they only exist to, hypothetically, they only exist to serve the interests of the people who are the citizenry. And when they're not doing that, what good are they? And then simultaneously, the question is, how do you set up something that's parallel to them, ignores them, is illegible to them, and doesn't rely on their influence and what they can do for society writ large? How do you develop those parallel things, those alternatives? And what do you think are some good ways to go about that?
Yeah, there's a lot in there. So I think first and foremost, like I wanted to stake a little bit of ground. So, I don't not believe in governance. I think governance is extremely important. I think government is an issue the way we have it right now, at the scale specifically that we have it right now. So that was kind of the first point, like governance over government, right? And effective governance for the people, representing the people at the smallest scale possible, right? So like in my little thingy here, if I can point to it, scale reductionism, like that's kind of where I obsess, right? So, I think that there's a sort of kind of perversion, coercion, sort of a type of violence, right? That happens when we live our lives by proxy to some larger scale than us in the community, right? So when we live our life, when we govern by proxy to some federal government that really represents a fraction of a percentage of the people, that's an issue, right? That's to me, it's almost a violent system, right? As an example, right? I vote to bring in some senator that represents, New Hampshire or whatever state I might live in, and they're really pushing whatever de facto issue of the day, abortion, gun control, whatever else. It might be what I believe in. That person might represent me, but I don't believe it shouldn't represent anybody else, beyond a very close proximity of me and the people I know. So I would not want somebody in New Hampshire, a New Hampshire representative, making decisions that affect California, and I wouldn't want California to make decisions that represent me. So that's kind of what I mean by sort of a type of coercion or violence by scale. And the same thing happens from a corporation side of thing. Like, I don't know that corporations are inherently evil, but I know that large scale ones can tend to be more often than not. So I think, fundamentally, I want to reduce the scale of things, right? I want to live more at arm's length. I want us to have an arm's length connection with our politics and our politicians, right? Who was it? Chesterton, like, keep your politicians close enough to kick them or whatever. That's a pretty powerful sentiment, and same thing with supply chains and getting to the sort of the corporate and commerce side of things. Like, I want arm's length supply chains to the greatest extent possible. Like, I want us to be providing our first things and us being community, right? Not necessarily self-sufficient. And we've had a lot of discourse about that on Twitter recently, but, so a sort of like some sort of like a libertarian mutualism, I guess, or a conservative communitarian, right? Like we have the power at the community level to do much more than we do now. We do a lot more by proxy, and therefore we have, you know, undue coercion on other people. Other people have undue coercion on us, and that's what I want to move away from. So that's sort of like a high level, but that didn't really answer your question. Your question was like, how do we get there?
Well, yeah, because that's what everyone's so used to, and this is like a big thing that I wrestle with, which is everyone is so used to a certain way of doing things, and they have subcontracted out their thought and their political, civic action involvement, whatever you want to call it. They have, because they've never really had to do it, and now you have, for example, if you have people who are grown-ups, adults, who've never really been civically engaged at the level. I'm not saying they're not going out and getting signatures and they're not like involved in the party stuff, or they're not going to events, fundraisers, and you know, petitioning and calling your congressman or whatever. But that's again, you're just you're doing that at such a length, and it's so diffuse, and there's really no accountability to the people who you're voting for. And then you have, a few years ago, the statistics come out that I think the person who spends more money in an election wins 94% of the time. That changed a little bit in the past decade or so, but so it's really ineffectual stuff. So what do you do if you're just a person who's then, so now you're an adult, people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, they don't have the habit of being civically engaged in a meaningful, near to their own life way. Children aren't really brought up in that way either. So where does it start? And I know it's got to start somewhere, and I know I don't have the answer.
Yeah, I think, you know, the thing that comes to mind, you know, again, Papa Wendell-Berry, but, you know, I think he said when things become divorced, the only thing you can do is start taking two things that belong together and put them together, right? And sort of eat that elephant one thing at a time. And I think fundamentally, really, it starts with food, or food at least is literally the low-lying fruit, right? Like we can have a closer connection to our food. And so much of it, like, I don't want to be cliche, but so much of it is awareness. And maybe I think that's where storytelling comes in. But like, there's people that I know that don't even know that you can buy a quarter or a half a cow or a regular meat CSA, you know, within a 30-minute drive from their doorstep. Like, they don't even know that that's an option because, you know, people are busy and whatever else excuse you want to come up with. But I think, you know, it starts with letting those folks know that A, the system that they take for granted is fragile, and B, like, an alternative is closer than you think. And try to put those two things together, right? Put people
without a doubt. And I just want to know
food.
for the record, anybody listening now, he's not being opportunistic with the supply chain stuff. The people, we've been talking about the supply chain stuff for 2 years or whatever,
For sure.
online.
Yeah.
Years.
Yeah.
So this is not opportunism. These things are happening, have been happening. And you're right, the things are a lot there. People don't, you're saying it's not on their radar. People aren't in the habit of it. So I always want to add on to that. Like, some people think posting about, oh, I bought this, I did this thing, I did this trad thing online. They think it's self-indulgent and they think it's navel-gazing. But don't underestimate the amount of people that even you, an individual, Anarcho-Contrarian, has shown some stuff online, and then they go and they change the way they're doing stuff, because it's not me, but Ashley told me some guy sent her an email. I don't remember who it was, but he said, I sent you an email, and I had read your post, and then I like 2 months later, I bought a homestead.
Yeah, that's awesome.
He sent her an email directly. So like, don't think that what you're doing in this digital sphere, I'll be the first one to be contrarian about it, and to give it its, I think, just critique and what it has coming to it, and what it lacks and what it doesn't help to serve. But it's not worthless. And I don't want anybody to think that. Obviously, we're doing a podcast online with Zoom. So I'm more
the stakes couldn't be lower.
Yeah, exactly. So, but
yeah,
it's helpful and it's useful, and people have to become aware of it, like you were saying, and talking about it online is okay for them to become aware. But then again, this question's always there. How do you make it? Because it's not going to spread like wildfire like the internet did. And it's because of the scale of how quickly and easily you can massively change commerce, change communication, change socializing, whatever. because it can't inherently can't do that because it's on a human scale. As I think you know what I'm talking about. It's person to person. It's living near the people. It's talking to them in person.
Sure.
But how do we foment that action wise?
I think it can happen quickly. I mean, you think about like,
I hope I'm wrong.
Upstate New York, right, has been transformed in 18 months because of COVID, right? There are definitely like, and there are macro like global or large country regional level things that are coming down the pipe, right? That like, you know, supply chain issues, right? It's not a big deal if we're not getting our marketing doodads from China, right? Like that's all right. But the fact that we've tied up, like you said, those first uses, those things that we absolutely need to survive as humans, we've tied them up in these incredibly complicated supply chains. You know, when things start shaking like this, you can move people very quickly, and they start looking, when there's a fire, right? People start looking for the exit, and they also start just the loudest voice wins. Like the person who just sounds like they know what they're doing can win. And I think that we're heading into incredibly chaotic times. I would argue we're already there, like, but we're heading into, incredibly chaotic times, which means that it's very difficult to predict in what way this is all going to cut, right? People could quickly glomp onto something that just sounds like a solution. I mean, this is the funny thing is,
and then if it works and it proves itself to be worthwhile, then maybe that's the tipping point where there's no.
I mean, think about how quickly we like smoking was a 4-century institution in this country, and in a single generation, it basically was more or less snuffed out, right? I mean, these things can happen.
Nice.
I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people that smoke, right? I mean, obviously, it's still there, but like it was like 85% of Americans over 16 smoked. And now it's like less than 25%. And that happened in almost a single generation, right? And so you start getting those kind of societal pressures coming from all different points, and you can get massive transformation very quickly. I mean, our current, the way we do things in this country, these kind of like political and cultural pressures are not very old. The internet, for all intents and purposes, I mean, the cell phone, right, is 15 years old. Or the smartphone is. I was thinking like Zuckerberg was in his dorm room in 2005 or 2004 and was the head of a $1 billion company by 2014, right? Like, I mean, these things can change really rapidly. And I wanted to add one other thing is that I don't think it's ever been easier to actually have political influence in your location, right? Like literally no one wants to be the head of sewer for a city. No one wants that job, and you're not going to get paid for it. It's not a fun job, but in many cases, you simply have to just run, throw your name in the hat, and boom, you're there. You've got political power now. You've actually got control over certain aspects of your locality. And so I think like, we're all so caught up in the national and international memes, right, going on. And I think that's where a lot of the disconnect comes, is that when you're actually, it's not that people can't hate each other face to face, right? But it takes a lot of energy to look someone in the eye and hate them, right? It takes a lot of energy, especially if you're relying on each other for mutual benefit, right? And so my advice would be simply just plug into your local community, because I promise you there's a job no one wants to do in your local government, right? Or in your HOA or whatever is your local community. I'm the communications chair for our local Friends of Parks board, right? It was really easy to get plugged in because literally no one wanted to do it. They were like recruiting people, and I don't have a lot of power, but it's a way of, I'm now plugged in, right? I'm now plugged into some aspect of the local community that I care about. Sure. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of great points in there. So like, I guess, I think there's resilience and there's political power or maybe political like autonomy is a better way of putting it, right? And those are like two separate things. So like there's things that we can do locally to be more resilient in general. Like you can be a better neighbor, right? You can be more well-equipped, more diverse in your skill sets to provide for yourself. Like those are first things, right? We should work on those first things, and that should always be like a constant stream in our mind. Like how can I be a better father or wife or neighbor or what have you, community leader. But yeah, you made an absolutely great point with respect to like political autonomy. Like there are a lot of opportunities at the smaller scale, which really, I mean, your day-to-day interactions, like your mayor or your city councilor or your town selectman, you know, has probably more effect on your day-to-day community life than your state senator does, or your state rep, or, you know, the president of the United States, right? So the scale is always going to matter, although increasingly so that may not be the case. You know, like the 10th Amendment is continually ignored and basically cast aside, like over the past 50 years. You know, there's less and less local autonomy at the state level to make decisions. So, you know, I'm an advocate of reverting back to the 10th Amendment as much as possible. But
yeah, and this is a good, yeah, while we're on this topic, this is something that I get frustrated with a lot when I see a lot of what Trace, I think, correctly identified as the national, international political noise stuff, is that I don't know why people aren't more aware of the idea of federalism, is that if something's not working, if something works for one state and they want to do it a certain way, then you should just let them do that and leave them alone. Because you were talking about the difference between New Hampshire, you don't want someone in New Hampshire determining what happens and how someone lives in California. And that's like the good thing about federalism. And even if it's some weird state that I'm like, I wouldn't want to live there, and I think their politics are wacky, if they stand up to the federal government and win according to the rule of law, that's probably a net win for everybody, because it doesn't take away X state's ability to govern it and live a certain way. And like, what is the problem with that? I don't know why. I mean, I do know why, but I don't want to just go into speech mode. It's something that comes up across my screen and frustrates me, and I don't think I've really talked about it ever on the screens, but now I'm talking in person, so I just wanted to bring that up. I thought it was relevant enough. And so,
yeah, I mean,
sorry,
you know, set aside like basic human civil rights, right? Those issues, you know, should be as consistent as possible, but basically everything else, like, we need more diversity. We need more decentralization and trial and error. Like there's no reason why, you know, Texas can experiment with different economic models than California does, or you know, healthcare or any childcare or anything in between. Like why do we all need to be the same? Like it's not clearly not working.
You don't.
And it removes people's choice and autonomy.
Correct, and you're totally right. And why would you? With a lot of calls, and rightfully in many instances, for diversity, like wouldn't you learn more having different places trying different things and learning from each other? I mean, I think that's happened and been shown plenty of times in the 20th century and 21st century. Like, why are we now suddenly turning this to that being a taboo, to that being no, there's only one right political way of thinking, and both poles of this and everything in between seems more to that inclination. I have no problem with people existing somewhere where I'm not, trying something out differently. And another frustrating thing when you get to these political discourse type things. So I do agree with you that localism and scale reductionism largely does solve most of that, because no one's ever going to live exactly the same way anyway. Like, why are we trying to now have that be a top-down mandate? It's odd to me and frustrating. But that's why we're chatting about it.
I think, like, I mean, there was logic to all of this, right? If you just go like one step back and just keep following it back, like, I mean, we have modern federalism because of Jim Crow. Like, I mean, or the modern federal government is because of Jim Crow. And I mean, that it's like,
you related really to Jim Crow, Trace?
Yeah, I am. Yeah. But like, that's, you know, that's the issue, right? And like, you know, and that was, I mean, it becomes really sticky, right? The problem is that, like, you know, these things have knock-on effects, right? Colorado makes weed legal, right? And it affects the neighboring states. You know, if Alabama makes abortion illegal, right, that affects Georgia, right? Because people are going to be coming over to Georgia. And now it creates this whole problem for us. Chicago is constantly held up as like, guns are illegal, but look at all the gun violence. And it's like, it's because guns, they just go 20 minutes outside the city and they're in Indiana and can get all the guns they want, right? And so there are, you know, I mean, the very first, if you look at like the first 15 years of the United States, it was nonstop litigation between states to sort out interstate commerce, right? It was, and the railroad pushed it, steamboats pushed it. It was a freaking nightmare. And especially it was New York City, right? Because it was like Philadelphia, New York City, New Jersey, like all these stuff were like bound up together, right? And they had to sort out all this stuff. And I think that like there's a logic to all of it. And it's also like a total mess, right? I mean, it's just a total mess because now essentially the federal government is the funder of everything. Now, I do think there is more leniency in this system than most people realize, because actually the federal government in almost all cases is actually just funding programs that are either operated by private interests, like, you know, like half of our military is basically defense contractors, right? Or is actually just money given to the states and counties to spend within a lane, but there's a lot of leniency within that lane. I'd argue the county level is actually the most dynamic level of government because it's getting gobs of state and federal money, and they have a lot of flexibility in how they can spend it. And it also is much more like, you know, where your county council members live, right? Like, you know where they are. They're people that you can go and kick, right? Like Chesterton, right? And so I personally, professionally and personally, I'm banking a lot on county governments as being the scale at which people can really plug in and start to change things, because you have the resources to do it. And I also think increasingly the federal government has no real power beyond the money, which it's using money as leverage, essentially blackmailing states to do what they want them to do.
Exactly.
And now we know states are going to push back against that. They're going to, because of the Supreme Court, the way it is, they're going to start winning those cases. And the federal government will soon just be like the Medicis. It'll just be like this patrician government that just gives money to smaller governments to actually manage their affairs. But we're gonna have problems with that, right? Like, I mean, Jim Crow is back and will be back. Like, I mean, if the federal government is not there as a buttress against that, it's back, and it's going to be a huge problem. I mean, and these are my main concerns with localism. I know we're not going to solve racism on this podcast, right? But my problem with localism is if you collapse it down. If you collapse it down overnight, huge swaths of the American populace are overnight have no rights in their own backyards.
Sure,
right?
absolutely. And nor do they have the skills, nor do they have the skills to govern themselves or the knowledge to govern themselves or provide those first things to themselves if we're talking about, you know, resilience versus governance. But yeah, I mean, you know, my hope is not to tear it down all overnight or build up some alternative overnight. Like, we're gonna have to figure this stuff out. You know, in terms of thinking, in terms of things being messy, I mean, they're definitely going to be messy, right? Like, we're in a complex system. There are wrinkles. Like, you're not going to be able to push down this little wrinkle and then it's going to stay flat. You're going to push down this wrinkle and a new one's going to come up over there. So we just need to figure out, you know, how to disentangle ourselves from this crazy federal complex system and try to do more locally. And, you know, if at the very least we have like sort of local, small scale non-compliance, you know, and then like Joe Norman says, like, we need an era of based states. Well, I don't know if we need based states, but we need an era of states where they push back and assert themselves and say, hey, listen, like, no strings attached here. Like, you know, you are coercing us. Like, we have the autonomy to make decisions at the smaller level about, you know, whatever thing it might be. Again, you know, civil rights aside, I obviously would not want to, you know, tear down any system that protects basic civil rights, of course. But I think, you know, going back to like at the beginning of that quick rant, like we're losing the skills to be good neighbors and to be good autonomous political entities, right? Like, in an era of social media, all we are doing is arguing with people who we perceive to be our enemies, like halfway across the world or across the country. You know what I mean? Like not working out so good, right? So
look at how prescient Anarcho-Contrarian is. In my notes, I'm going to read them verbatim. My notes say, and I quote, no editorial here. People using their political affiliations as external, superficial fashion statements, how can people get away from that trap and just be human with each other?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind there, right? So like we used to have more of a capacity to be better people to each other and better governors of our community, right? So, and being from New England, I sort of come from a long line of like small scale democracy, the town meeting model. And, I've said it on Twitter plenty of times, people should read the Vermont Papers because it gives a really good outline of, like why Vermont sort of dodged the Industrial Revolution or development associated with the Industrial Revolution and other sort of political progress, quote unquote, that came along with that. But how their fundamental town meeting model like could be leveraged to a better type of localism. But it talks a little bit about rural living, at least pre-internet and social media, where you could communicate and argue with somebody halfway across the world that has no bearing on your life. But rural living in essence was about relationships bound by place, and those relationships were messy. Like when I was a kid, you didn't know like where somebody politically stood, and it didn't matter, you know what I mean? Like if you had a political disagreement, like you take those disagreements out basically once a year at town meeting, and the rest of the year like you are depending on your neighbor, at the very least. So in the Vermont Papers they talk about disagreement needing to be dealt with at the rural level, and relationships go deeper because of that. And they say that rural life breeds patience in the human condition that is fundamental to successful democracy, right? So like we need to be patient with each other because we will not agree on everything. Like despite what the model is trending towards, like that's never going to happen. We're not going to all be the same. We're not going to all agree. So we need to have like deeper relationships and how to manage our disagreement. And I can tell you that like arguing on Twitter is not going to solve anything, right? Like that's not deepening our democracy in any way. So I think we just need to practice those skills of like being a good neighbor, burying political differences, like not propping up certainly federal politicians as like some solve all solution, as some like quasi celebrity. Like we should have more allegiance to our neighbor than any political party, period, and certainly to some federal politician. Like,
without a doubt. And I think it's pretty. I mean, I know it's true for me personally, which is I really, really don't care what a journalist who lives in Washington D.C. I really don't care what their opinion is that much. I do care that they can influence more people than the people who live by me or whatever. But really, I also don't care about what my neighbor's opinion is, as long as he's not doing anything bad to me. He's not causing any like big, large scale damage. And this is definitely the case where I live currently in rural Uruguay. People all over the place, and I am friends with all of them. And I just doesn't matter that much. But it's kind of been made to seem that it's the only thing that matters in the United States in the technological age, in the social media age, and it just isn't. And I know that arguing that with people online, who are the people who most need to hear it and most need to be engaged and confront that reality, I know that's fruitless. And so I know I'm being a little doomer pessimistic today. I don't know what I need to maybe take my vitamins or something.
A lot of my optimism comes, and maybe this will help you, Patrick. I don't know if it will, but like a lot of my optimism comes from like, I just have no faith that these things at scale can operate for very much longer, right?
Sure.
They are already, I mean, you're already seeing it, right? You're seeing large scale rebellion among the American populace against the federal government, right? Why it is notable this time is it is actually crossing political boundaries. You actually have people on the left and the right, and increasingly in the center, starting to go like, oh yeah, no, nothing will ever change in Washington. That we have no control. Elections don't matter. We really, and that's the beginning of it, right? I mean, just like money, like government is really like, it's as strong as your belief in it. And once that belief is shaken, it's now on really, really shaky ground. It's on the edge of a dune that's about ready to slide down and the house is going to crack up. I personally believe states are too big as well. I don't think that the state governments are any better capable of managing, certainly in Georgia where I live, right? Like there is the same problems we have at the Washington level, we have at the state level with Georgia, because you have Atlanta and then you have everywhere else, and they're 50-50, right? It's like literally 5 million people live in the Atlanta
Illinois,
region.
even worse.
Yeah, exactly. And
Illinois had $10 billion of unpaid bills, and it's like they're just private vendors, and it's like, no, we'll pay you later. So that's just
yeah. I mean,
it's
they can't manage it at the state level. That's why I come down. I think the county level is the sweet spot in many cases. But yeah, I think like my optimism comes because I just feel like these systems we don't have to break them because they're breaking themselves. We really have to just focus ourselves on building the alternative, and the alternative can only be built locally.
Yeah, and make sure that you're not susceptible to, when they do completely break beyond the point of being useful or willful or being able to exert their power at all, that you aren't still relying on them just enough to make yourself be in a tricky situation.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think
anyway,
going back to like how does change happen, and I think it would sort of be like twofold, right? So it's going to happen via necessity, right? That's what Trace was just talking about. Like it's going to happen. There's going to be external forces that are going to force people to change, and I think we can model what good change is by sort of memeing a spark into existence that hopefully ignites a bigger fire, right? And that's where I think storytelling comes in. Again, to get back to that, that's where sort of I hate to say it, but like aesthetics comes in. Like if you could cottagecore your way into somebody being interested in keeping chickens in their backyard so they can eat when they can't get eggs, you know what I mean? Like that's a spark that started, and
yes, people like looking at beautiful things for a reason.
Absolutely. That's like the best, that's the best corner of Twitter, I think. And that's where I spend a good amount of my time. I try to share those stories from my upbringing, right? Because I sort of look at myself as like a little bit of an anomaly, right? Like I'm like a sort of later millennial, but I grew up, like most of probably my grandparents' generation would have grown up, or your grandparents' generation would have grown up. I grew up in a very small rural place on a multi-generational farm, very, very small community. I went to school all the way through elementary school with like 5 kids in my class, in a 2-room schoolhouse, like, and that was badass. That was awesome. Like that was a fun way to live. I can tell you that much. And that's not that far away for me, like that was 30 years ago. And people don't realize that we are that close. Like we are that close to that type of an existence that we can sort of emulate more and more. So like I use pictures and storytelling to be like, hey, this is in my lifeline. Like I'm only late 30s, you know what I mean? Like we can go back there. We have the capacity to go back there. So, and that's why I talk about a bunch about, pie in the sky sort of incentives, like what would incentivize a re-ruralization or a return home. I mean, mostly I talk about that because I'm nostalgic. Like I wish it was the case for me. I wish there was no state income tax or no federal income tax if you return to sort of an underrepresented and depressed area that you came from. Like that's what we need, man. We needed to stay put a little bit more than we did throughout the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. I mean, Papa Wendell Berry again, it takes 3 generations in place to know a place and love a place. Like we need that multi-generational model. And what little I can do by posting cool pictures or whatever on Twitter, hopefully it has some effect. Like it was awesome. Not a lot of people experience what I experienced growing up. And I want to share it with people to maybe inspire them to have that life for themselves or their kids or maybe their grandkids, whatever the case may be. But so that's the little bit of memeing into existence that I try to do to try to inspire some change at least.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah, I had a very similar upbringing in that I came from a very small, self-contained town. It wasn't rural, but it also wasn't, it was self-contained. It was an old fishing village, right? Like at the mouth of the Grand River where it empties into Lake Michigan. It existed because of the fish, right? And fish cleaning. And it was a nice little port for fishermen to come and clean their fish and then get it into where Grand Rapids is and that kind of stuff in Michigan. And I used to be able to like literally just like hop on my bike and ride from one end of town to the other, and it wasn't until I got to college that I realized how incredibly charmed that was, right? Like it was like, it was like, this is water kind of thing, David Foster Wallace. Like it was the bath I was swimming in. I didn't realize how unique it was until I saw Southeast Michigan, basically in Detroit and all the suburbs. And I was like, oh, this is, and then I left Michigan and realized, oh, wow, this is the way most of America looks, is just like McDonald's, Strodes, highways, just suburban dreck is what most of America is. And I think my whole journey has almost been like trying to get back there, like trying to do what I can to create the environment in which that becomes the desirable or the cost-effective way to build, and continue to live. I will say, whatever that income tax benefit is, we need to figure out wherever Boiled Owl is and just carve a circle around that, because he definitely does not want anyone moving to his area. So
for sure. I think, so it sounds like a very similar situation, right? The current in which we swam, you and I, and most people, frankly, was like away from those small, unique rural places and towards something that looked like everything else, right? And I have like a lot of hard feelings towards that, man. That's exactly what happened to me. And so anything I can do to combat the narrative that like that kid's going places, right? Why do you have to go places to become something? You know what I mean? Like, why is that associated with worth and value? So yeah, do I want to drive a whole bunch of city folks like into these small towns? Like, no, I want to start first with triaging the small towns, man. I want to keep the people the people who otherwise would love to stay home, like, like I did. Those folks, I want to give them a reason to stay, and whether that's through narrative and Neil, the fun is the great evangelizer. Like that's probably the easiest way, man. This place is great. It's beautiful. Like, why would you ever want to leave? That would be like the first medicine I would try to give, and then there's economic incentives, right? So, and that I think is where you get, let's send the sons and daughters home. Like, let's bring them home. And that's totally selfish and nostalgic of me. Like, that's what I want to do. I want to head home. And bring my family there and bring back some life into those communities that totally have the infrastructure to do all the things that we're talking about, right? They have, especially in New England, like small river towns, a lot of them still close to either active or somewhat active railways, like
and navigable rivers too.
Absolutely. Yeah. So prop up those small towns, because once those are gone, and they're basically already are, but whatever life is left, we gotta kindle a little bit, because that's what we need. That we need a model. We need multiple models to show like how this can work, and make it a viable option for people. And I'm not saying like banish the cities or whatever. I mean, if people want to live in cities, great, but there should be like two good options, and right now there's not. So
yeah, the rural urban conflict you had talked about, it's this thing's been around for centuries. It actually comes up a lot in some of the classes that I've taught, this conflict between rural and urban. And, going places thing, is it just because you feel like the big fish, small pond type thing? Well, who invented that phrase, and how can we banish that into the memory hole of history? Because just be a fish.
Yeah.
Who is this? Who is this? Is it because of the economic system? Is it because of mass communication with like ideas of fame and glory? Is it just something innately human to like pursue this overly destructive, ambitious expansion? I don't know what it is, but it's silly, it's stupid, and the way that people then try to make a villain out of the people that they're not is very silly to me. And I had the opposite trajectory of you guys. I'm from an urban area. Never really fell in love with urban areas, liked visiting them, liked some things about them, but never really, I don't want to say fell for them. And then I live in an area now where I can only see 5 houses. The nearest house is a quarter mile away.
Mhm.
So it's very rural. And I like it a lot more. But what do you think is at the heart of the rural urban conflict, as far as we can manage to talk about like nowadays? And
I mean, it's industrialization, right? I mean, the point is that like industry destroyed the job prospects in rural areas, and so they had, America is really great about painting a romantic, pastiche on something that's actually very traumatic and difficult. And what happened in the 19th century is that we just like consolidated farms. We had, the railroad made it impossible for local farmers to make a living. They lost their family farms. We had several Dust Bowl type of situations, even prior to the Great Depression. There was like a Great Depression style economic crisis every decade from like 1830s to the 1910s. Like it was just incredibly destructive. That's what always bothers me when people that we've memory hold just the literal trail of dead that followed the Industrial Revolution, right? I mean, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people died, were maimed, had their livelihoods just arbitrarily destroyed in the march of progress, right? And that led them to the cities because it was the only place that they could make this new living, right? At the turn of the 19th century, America was, you were either a farmer or you were a small business owner, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was it. Those were the 2 jobs, or you were aristocratic, right?
Good
But
job
you
if
had
you can get it.
yeah. And then by the 1850s, 1860s, there were no small business owners anymore. It was like you were either a laborer, a wage earner, or you were a farmer still, and it was very like incredibly disruptive. And so we've made this story about how the bright lights of the cities and like you can go make something of yourself. And then also let's not discount the fact that like, there have always been gay people. There's always been oddballs. There's always been people who did not fit in their community. And if you were in a town of 500 people and you were the gay guy, like you could not stay there. You could not stay there. You had to leave, right? And we had all sorts of euphemisms for those things. They were colorful. He was flamboyant, right? But the point is that they didn't want you there, so you had to leave. And so that's like, that's kind of the story of the rural-urban divide. But it just doesn't. None of it holds anymore, right? Like we're clinging on to these literal centuries-old stories we tell ourselves. Like
them,
cities. Modern sewers, like modern medicine, like cities don't have to be dirty, crime infested places anymore. And they also can have lots of agriculture in them, right? Like there's no reason for cities to be like the way we've envisioned them. And rural areas no longer have to be the closed-minded, like backwards places that we've told ourselves they are. Like we can have like a wide variety of different types of things. There are lots of people that want to live in a rural experience, who are coming at it from a very different lens than what we've traditionally told ourselves. And there's lots of people who want to live in cities. I think we've just sort of like, the cities are no longer the cities and the rural areas are no longer the rural areas. We just sort of have this like everywhere is just kind of a crappy
the
version of itself.
social concepts and schema, they're just very hard to chip away at, and yeah, they die hard for sure.
Yeah.
Anything else to say, Anarcho, or we want to go talk about something super fun? Oh, don't worry, I'll remember. I'll remember to talk about it.
I have lots of feelings about the urban and rural divide, and they're more, I guess you did a great job, Tress, about like talking about the history of it. And I think in a modern context, for me, it's some weird mixture between like visibility and connectivity because of social media, right? So all of a sudden, like people who've been in the cities or suburbs and only know the cities and suburbs, like see, a bunch of like quote unquote like rednecks, like, oh my God, they're drinking Bud Light, like they're driving around a pickup truck, like they don't look like me. That's weird, and vice versa. Like, you get people who live in a rural place and, they see, images on social media about urban life, and they're like, that's weird and scary to me too, So I think a certain amount of it is like there's hyper visibility and hyper connectivity that sort of kindles the fire, and then from a political and sort of, sort of a cultural political sense, like because there's a sense that there's such high stakes, like the federal government and the federal level like culture war means everything. Like for whatever reason, there's those high stakes. Like I need to participate in this argument, for whatever reason. Like no, you don't need to participate in that argument. You really don't.
No, you don't. And people think they're missing out on life if they don't. It's like, no. There's life that's not that.
Yeah. So I think, there's too much connectivity and too much visibility. And, in terms of like labeling folks, so the other point I was going to make, right. And so now because of that ultra high perceived stakes of the federal government, I think the Electoral College, like, has become a fuel to the fire of like those backwards like rednecks in rural areas are ruining it for me. Like if it wasn't for them and the Electoral College, like I would have my perfect progressive utopia or whatever. And if you think you can get a perfect progressive utopia, like cool, have that where you are, but labeling somebody as being privileged or having like a disproportionate amount of control because they live in a rural area, an Electoral College is like some BS, you know what I mean? Like, and if those people are disgruntled and are trying to like leverage what little bit of power they might have left, like maybe it's because like everything was taken from them, you know what I mean? Like maybe because over generations, like they saw their family leave because they had to, because they were going places, you know what I mean? Like their sons and daughters were literally taken from them. And so that would make me pretty pissed off and disgruntled. So maybe instead of like labeling them as backwards, let's like figure out what could heal them and repair them, and move towards that, or just settle our differences, like bury the hatchet, because that is a thing you can do too, you can be like, we're not going to agree.
Reconciliation before you ever get to a civil war. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Do preemptive.
Yeah, exactly.
Preemptive, proactive reconciliation. Yeah. Okay, I have something fun I want to talk about.
Fun. Let's do it.
A true story. And I'm gonna butter you up again. You have to schedule your butterings of your guest at the beginning, in the middle, and then at the end say you didn't. Then I can insult you at the end when there's nothing else on the line. Anarcho-Contrarian, whose really beautiful gray beard you're looking at right now, Anarcho-Contrarian invented a sport which was so much fun. You were talking about our buddy Boiled Owl, his line about fun is the great evangelizer. This man, Anarcho-Contrarian, along with a 12-year-old friend of ours, invented a sport that was so much fun, I have to tell you about it. The name of this sport is called beaver bocce. These gentlemen were in a stream. There were some beaver dams nearby, and they invented a form of bocce ball using only a flat rock that was half submerged in the creek and rocks and pebbles that they had just found at their feet. I haven't had so much fun playing a sport in years. And this playing beaver bocce got me to thinking about how I'm a very big sports fan, participation-wise, spectator-wise, all different sorts, like ones you wouldn't even imagine. But I have, as I've become, I don't know if I'm more mature, but I'm more of a grown-up. I never get tired of playing these games, but I do get tired of like how good the good people get at them. And I think there was something in this. I think it was the guy Christopher Lash that book about the
Revolt of
culture of
Elites.
narcissism. The
Oh,
culture of
yeah.
narcissism. He was talking about how sports are like too professional or whatever, and people are like focusing on the like getting so good at them, and the people are practicing. I think it would be really fun to invent a whole league of sports where the game literally doesn't exist until that day. You get people to come play it, and you just invent it out of nowhere. I think we were talking about a sport that somebody who I've known claims that they invented it, the thing where you have the rebar and the cup sitting on the rebar and there's a frisbee involved. Inventing sports like this, I think, is so much fun. Do you think that this has any traction to it? Is this a way to expand our big tent? Because if fun is the great evangelizer, using that as a metaphor, but also as a specific question about like just making up games and just getting together with people and doing stuff like that. I'll never forget that. I don't even remember the exact rule. Something about if you knocked the one rock off and it went below the water level. I don't remember.
Yeah, that's where the
matter.
that's where the bocce came in. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and the spontaneity of it, and how it just came from nowhere, just from being in a physical place with people. And it was you, it was me. I didn't invent it. It was you and a 12-year-old friend of ours. Just came out of nowhere. That was a pretty magical moment, and I thought it would be worth relaying to show people how quickly and impactful doing something spontaneous, doing something with people, doing something in a place, in a context, can really affect somebody who, I'm sensitive, but I'm not that easily affected, I don't think. But it really stuck with me. And since you're the inventor of it, I want you to, any of the things I talked about, whatever, I know it was a
claiming the rights to
range
beaver
of
bocce.
Yeah, you need to get your credit, because only, I think, 5 people know that this sport even exists.
Yeah, I'll take royalties. I think you can take payment in Twitter now. So yeah, he can send.
When the Wikipedia page gets written, I will make sure that I contribute and tell people who really invented it, because there's no way anybody else invented that game before you. So go ahead.
Sure. No, I mean, there's a lot there, and that's a cool thread to pull on. You know, that was a cool day. That like brought me right back to my childhood. Like I used to play in Brooks all the time. That's what we did for fun, and you know, that's what you get when you have like leisure time combined with, you know, a beautiful place and not much resources, right? Like you make fun out of things, and you don't need to be good at something to do something, right? I think that's like the Simon Saris, like one of his popular tweets, like there's this false perception that you need to be a master of something in order to even like start it or continue to do something. Like
such a destructive premise. It's super sad.
Yeah, and then, you know, that gets us into like the generalization versus specialization argument. You know, like we've over specialized and over professionalized pretty much every aspect of our living, right? Like you can't grow your own food. You're not a farmer. Like what do you know about it? What, are you kidding me? You know, or you know, how dare you like try to repair your house? Like you're going to ruin something. You're going to get hurt. Like that's dangerous. Like, no, man, come on. Yeah, you know, a culture of amateurism, I think, is good and absolutely what's necessary, because that ties all in, whether it's games or trying something new that's more tangible to like your daily needs. Like you can try. It's okay to try. It's okay to fail too. And you don't need to
Failing's
ask
fun a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It's actually quite fun.
Yeah, and it you don't need anybody's permission either. That's like another side of it. So I mean, I think, and that's something where we carved out time to meet in real life. Like now we're talking about online life versus real life, right? Like, you know, can you imagine like we all got together in an outside place and we're like splashing in a brook and having fun and drinking a couple of beers or whatever, and there was families involved? Like what, whole families? Like, you know what I mean? That's the good stuff. Like that's what life's all about, you know. So the more of that we can do, the better. And you know, and it doesn't have to be in a rural setting either. Like, you know, I don't live in a rural setting now. You know, I live in very much a neighborhood, and man, we have a blast on the block. We have block parties all the time, and the kids are riding bikes and all that stuff. Like costs barely anything, and you know, we don't need to like enroll our kids in ballet and pottery class and, you know, whatever else, soccer 4 seasons out of the year. Like we just need to hang out together. You know, it doesn't cost anything to do that, and you get to know your neighbor, and maybe you guys try to build a chicken coop together when nobody knows what the hell they're doing, and that's okay. You know, and maybe you do that without asking permission, and that's probably okay too. Like so that's maybe ties back to the anarchism, like you know, do this stuff, try this stuff, like get together with your neighbors and take some command and do it.
You know what I like just now? How you basically, you're talking about like DIY. You just DIY'd a great answer out of a terrible question. That
I don't think it was an answer at all, but maybe.
No, it was. That was great. The general versus the particular thing. It is so silly. Like the permission thing. Like you're not XYZ. Yeah, and this goes into the world of opinions now. You're not an expert. Why should I listen to you? It's just an opinion. And I've seen so many lay people bring up really good opinions that I have then brought to the experts who I know personally, and their answers were not very satisfying. The way that they dealt with it was not very satisfying, and that was pretty telling. But yeah, the getting together in person thing. I think we got the title for this episode. It's just got to be log off, bro. Log off, bro.
Go play and
stream. Yeah, we know the irony, but you are the people, online people. You're the ones who most need to hear it. Like if you're gonna say something like Twitter sucks, get out, log off. Like, oh, when you're on Twitter, it's like, yeah, these are the people who have to hear the message. Get off Facebook, it sucks. Like that's your whole. I don't think I've used the Facebook account. I open it one day a year on the birthday to see who said happy birthday. Get off of Facebook, everybody. In there. You're a hypocrite. It's like, no. I'm getting off too, but all of you come with me. So yeah, let's log off, bros. Anyway, thank you for that awesome answer. You contrived, not contrived, negative connotations. You pulled that answer out of the ether, just like you pulled Beaver Bocce out of the ether. And I don't know if Beaver Bocce is ever going to get played again. I don't know if I'll ever play it again. But I did play that.
Teach my kids. Why not? Why not?
Don't overly formalize the rules. Don't start an international federation. You're like, no.
But definitely argue. You have to argue. You have to argue over the rules.
Oh yeah. Process. Yeah. I think we changed the rules 3 times at different points because we realized that some little wrinkle came up. Like, well, and it was the size of the rock mattered too, because the 2 big of the ones, I don't know, what was it? The small ones didn't bounce. I don't remember.
Stunning radio. We should probably set that aside.
Yes. So anyway, that was fun. Yeah,
no, I think you really, the question is not as facetious as you're sort of making it out to be, because I think like, we do have this like real feeling that like we have to have it all figured out before we can start. And no, I mean, like getting to know your neighbors is really like, there's no formal way to do it. I mean, it is a lot easier when a new person moves in and you bring them a pie, bam, you have that intro, right? That kind of socially acceptable intro. But any day, it's just like the thing, like, like when was the best time to plant a tree? 10 years ago. When's the next best time? Right now, and food food and games, right? Are amazing opportunities. Just like, I have, I live in a suburban area, so I don't have a lot of room. I will never be able to like live off of my land, right? But gosh, I grew a crap ton of sweet Italian peppers this year, and I don't even particularly like them. So it's just like, here you go, neighbors. Here's some sweet peppers, or if you're a good cook, you can turn that into value add stuff. Like here, well, there's not much to do with the peppers per se, but like I'm planting a bunch of blackberries, right? So the idea is, maybe I can make some blackberry jam and just give them to my neighbors, or just give them a pint of blackberries, or make cookies for your neighbors, or do a little impromptu block party. We do those things.
Oh, like trick-or-treating with this week, please.
Exactly.
Make sure.
Exactly.
We even have trick-or-treating here. We have to drive to town, but we're bringing some friends along for some trick-or-treating, Uruguayan style.
You just have fun with your neighbors. The game. What I love about the game is it's just an excuse to get together. It's just an excuse to get together. It lowers the barriers because everyone's going to kind of look a little stupid, and you also kind of you can learn a lot about someone by the way they play a game and how they handle their uncertainty or their embarrassment maybe around not being good at the game. You can learn a lot about people with that stuff, and you just kind of need to get the ball rolling. There's really, there's no other way to do it. You just sort of have to just do it. And your neighbors are a great place to start. Yeah,
stuff only gets done by you doing it. So.
Yeah.
Like to what is that word? Manifest it into existence, but it's not all a mental process. And it can be tiring. but maybe that's where the logging off comes in.
Yeah.
All right. Anarcho-Contrarian. Anything else in your, what do you call it, banners that you want to talk about?
Anything else in my banners?
Here, you have to go like this so I can see your.
Oh man, I don't think so. We covered a lot of ground, and this is stuff that I spend a lot of time thinking about, but not a lot of time talking about. So I really appreciate the opportunity to yap our gums a little bit here and sort of chew on this stuff. I think just at the end of the day, I guess my closing message would be like, for sure, Ben Hunt, who I'm hoping to bring onto the podcast, he runs the blog Epsilon Theory. My favorite quote of his is, "Abandon the political party as your vehicle for political participation." Like, just stop it. Like, we don't have to play this two-party national game. Like, let's stop that at the very least. Like, instead of participating in arguing about Trump versus Biden or this or that, like, let's go outside and build a fence for your neighbors or have a block party or do something. But like, that's productive, participating in this political game.
Or at least effigy burning.
Yeah, or at least at least you're doing something, for crying out loud. So I think that's my takeaway is like, stop participating in this sport called federal politics, and let's start bringing the scale down to something closer to home. Because I can promise you, your neighbor is way more important to you than who gets elected the next president. Like, if somebody wants to aggrandize and say like, it's fascism or communism, like, stop it, man. Stop. Just stop. I'm not saying that could never happen, but let's focus on something that is much more tangible and closer to reality, which is our backyards.
Yeah. Yeah, and the stronger the local network is, the harder it is for scaled organizations to actually coalesce something powerful.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's simultaneously, it's not simultaneous. It's to solve to all of this, right? It's a way of just sort of solving sort of that gosh, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Atomization that's happening, right? It's like you can feel less lonely. You can fight the powers that be simply by being tighter with your neighbors, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Amen.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I think I'll probably do the cutoff when you kind of said I'll leave you guys with this thought. I'll probably figure out a place to cut it off around there.
I had a good one prepared.
Oh, well then,
let him do it. Let him do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Go for it.
All right. And so before we do that, thank you so much, Anarcho-Contrarian, inventor of Beaver Bocce, Trace Crow, Roots Down. Awesome job.
Awesome.
Very fun chat.
Yeah.
And thanks for letting me sit at the big kids table and steer the wheel of this rudderless boat, rudderless power boat, even better.
You did great, Patrick. So yeah, my closing thought is the big reveal, right? So everybody knows that Ashley is definitely the brains behind this power duo, and she's got a heart of gold. But not everybody knows that Patrick has a huge